morning sun cast long shadows across the Windsor Castle grounds as Sergeant Major Thomas Heartfelt adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. At 42 years old, he had served the royal family for nearly 2 decades, earning respect through unwavering dedication and an impeccable service record. His polished boots reflected the early light as he took his position outside the private family quarters, where young Prince George would soon begin another day under the careful watch of the royal protection team. Thomas had witnessed the young prince grow, from a toddler taking his first uncertain steps to the confident 10-year-old he had become. The boy possessed an intelligence that often surprised adults, coupled with a natural curiosity about the world beyond palace walls. Unlike many children of his status, George showed genuine interest in the people who surrounded him daily, often asking thoughtful questions about their lives and duties. On this particular Tuesday morning in March, the castle buzzed with its usual activity. Staff members moved efficiently through corridors, preparing for another day of royal obligations. The Princess of Wales had scheduled meetings with various charitable organizations, while Prince William reviewed briefings for upcoming official engagements. George, having completed his morning lessons with his private tutors, was granted a brief period of free time before lunch. The security protocols surrounding the young prince were extensive, yet designed to appear seamless. Every movement was coordinated, every potential risk assessed and minimized. Thomas had memorized every corridor, every exit, every possible scenario that might require immediate action. His colleagues often joked that he could navigate the castle blindfolded, but Thomas took no chances when it came to protecting any member of the royal family. As George emerged from the library, clutching a book about medieval history, he noticed Thomas standing at attention near the main staircase. The young prince had always been observant, picking up on details that others might miss. Today, however, something seemed different about the usually stoic guard. Thomas appeared more rigid than usual, his jaw set in a way that suggested inner tension. George approached slowly, his natural empathy drawing him toward the man who had been a constant presence throughout his childhood. The prince had learned to read people's moods and emotions, a skill that would serve him well in his future role, but sometimes made him more sensitive to others' distress than typical. Children his age, the castle's atmosphere, felt charged with an underlying current of unease, though most staff members continued their duties without apparent concern. Thomas maintained his professional demeanor, but years of royal service had taught George to notice the subtle signs of human emotion beneath formal facades. The slight tremor in the guard's hands, the way his eyes occasionally darted toward the windows, the almost imperceptible tightening around his mouth, all these details registered in the young prince's observant mind. What George didn't know was that Thomas had received devastating news just hours earlier. His younger brother, serving with the British Army in a peacekeeping mission abroad, had been seriously injured in an incident that military officials were still investigating. The phone call had come at dawn, shattering Thomas's carefully maintained composure and leaving him struggling to focus on his duties. While his thoughts remained thousands of miles away with his family, the weight of maintaining professional standards while dealing with personal crisis had always been part of royal service, but today felt different for Thomas. Every protocol seemed heavier, every responsibility more burdensome as he fought to compartmentalize his emotions and continue protecting the family he had sworn to serve. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he stood guard over someone else's child, his own family faced an uncertain future. George sensed this internal struggle without understanding its source. His natural compassion, nurtured by parents who emphasized the importance of empathy and service to others, compelled him to act. The young prince understood instinctively that sometimes the people who protected others needed protection themselves, even if it came in the simplest forms of human kindness and recognition. George set down his history book on a nearby marble table and walked directly toward Thomas, his young face serious with concern. The usual playful energy that characterized the 10-year-old had been replaced by a mature understanding that something required his attention. As he approached, Thomas immediately straightened further, if such a thing were possible, prepared to acknowledge the prince with the customary formal greeting. Instead of the expected exchange, George did something that caught Thomas completely off guard. The young prince reached out and gently placed his small hand on Thomas's arm, looking up at him with eyes that held wisdom beyond his years. The gesture was simple, lasting only a few seconds, but it carried the weight of genuine human connection that transcended the boundaries of royal protocol. "Sergeant Major," George said quietly, his voice carrying the careful diction instilled by years of proper education. "You look sad today. Is there anything I can do to help?" The question hung in the air between them, breaking through the invisible barriers that typically separated members of the royal family from their security detail. Thomas felt his carefully constructed professional facade begin to crack under the unexpected kindness of this child, who had noticed what none of the adults around them had perceived. For a moment, Thomas forgot his training, forgot the protocols that governed every interaction within these walls. He saw not the future King of England, but a young boy who had recognized another person's pain and chosen to acknowledge it with compassion. The simple humanity of the gesture overwhelmed him, and before he could stop himself, his eyes filled with tears that he quickly tried to blink away. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas began, his voice rougher than usual. My brother." He stopped himself, realizing he was about to share personal information that had no place in this professional relationship. The emotional walls he had spent decades building suddenly felt inadequate against the sincere concern of this child. George waited patiently, not pushing for details but simply maintaining that gentle contact and offering his presence as comfort. The prince had learned from his parents that sometimes people needed space to express themselves, and that rushing someone in distress often made things worse. His natural emotional intelligence guided him to provide exactly what Thomas needed in that moment: silent understanding and acceptance. The corridors of Windsor Castle had witnessed centuries of formal interactions, state ceremonies, and carefully choreographed royal life. But in this quiet moment, something unprecedented was occurring. A future monarch was breaking every rule of royal protocol to offer comfort to someone in need, treating a member of the staff not as a servant but as a fellow human being deserving of compassion and care. Other staff members who passed by noticed the unusual interaction, but none dared to interrupt what was clearly a significant moment. Some exchanged glances of surprise, while others smiled at the display of kindness that reflected the values Prince William and Catherine had worked so hard to instill in their children. Thomas struggled to maintain his composure as the full impact of George's gesture settled over him. In his 20 years of service, he had never experienced such direct, personal kindness from any member of the royal family. They had always been courteous and respectful, but this was different. This was one human being reaching out to another in a moment of genuine need. The young prince continued to stand beside him, offering silent support while Thomas gathered himself. George seemed to understand intuitively that sometimes the most powerful help comes not from grand gestures or elaborate solutions, but from the simple act of being present with someone in their moment of difficulty. This brief exchange was witnessed by several castle employees, each of whom would later struggle to explain exactly what they had observed. The incident would become the subject of quiet conversations in staff quarters, a moment that highlighted the remarkable character developing in the young prince and the profound impact that genuine human kindness could have even within the most formal and protocol-driven environments. Word of the unusual interaction spread quickly through the castle's intricate network of staff communications. By afternoon tea time, nearly every employee had heard some version of what had transpired between Prince George and Sergeant Major Heartwell. The reactions varied dramatically depending on each person's role and years of service within the royal household. Mrs. Elizabeth Thornberry, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for over 30 years, felt her heart swell with pride when she learned of George's compassionate gesture. Having watched the young prince grow up, she had always hoped he would develop the kind of character that would serve him well in his future role as monarch. This incident confirmed her belief that the Wales children were being raised with proper values that extended beyond royal duty to genuine human decency. However, not everyone viewed the incident with such approval. Commander James Blackwood, head of the Royal Protection Unit, received reports of the interaction with growing concern. In his mind, any deviation from established protocols represented a potential security risk and a dangerous precedent that could undermine the careful structure that kept the royal family safe. Commander Blackwood had built his career on maintaining absolute professional standards and ensuring that personal relationships never interfered with security operations. The idea that a member of the royal family might engage in spontaneous, Unscripted interactions with staff members sent alarm bells ringing through his systematic approach to protection duties. Within hours, Blackwood had called an emergency meeting with senior security personnel to discuss what he termed a significant breach of protocol. The conference room in the castle's security wing filled with uniformed officers, each trying to understand the gravity of what their commander clearly saw as a serious incident. "Gentlemen," Blackwood began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to unquestioning obedience, "we have a situation that threatens the foundational principles of royal security. Personal relationships between protected individuals and security staff create vulnerabilities that our enemies could exploit." The other officers listened carefully, though several struggled to see how a child's act of kindness could constitute a security threat. Blackwood continued his presentation, outlining scenarios where emotional connections might cloud professional judgment or create opportunities for manipulation by hostile forces. Thomas Hartwell sat in the back of the room, still processing the morning's events and their unexpected consequences. He had hoped to handle his personal crisis privately, while maintaining his professional duties. But Prince George's kindness had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that now threatened his career. The irony wasn't lost on Thomas that an act of compassion was being treated as a security breach. He understood Blackwood's concerns from a tactical standpoint, but the humanity of what had occurred seemed to be completely lost in the clinical analysis of protocols and procedures. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that Blackwood intended to use this incident as an example, sending a message to all security personnel about maintaining proper boundaries. The commander's reputation had been built on zero-tolerance policies and his ability to eliminate any factors that might compromise royal safety. Several veteran guards exchanged uncomfortable glances as they realized that Thomas was being positioned as a cautionary tale. Many of them had served long enough to appreciate the delicate balance between professional duty and human nature, understanding that complete emotional detachment wasn't always practical or healthy in long-term assignments. The discussion took on an increasingly formal tone as Blackwood outlined his intended response to the incident. It became apparent that he viewed Thomas's emotional state and Prince George's compassionate response as symptoms of a broader problem that required immediate correction through disciplinary action. Young Prince George, meanwhile, remained unaware of the administrative storm his simple act of kindness had generated. He spent his afternoon engaged in normal activities, occasionally thinking about Sergeant Major Hartwell and hoping that whatever had been troubling the guard might improve. The prince had no idea that his genuine concern for another person's well-being was being dissected and analyzed as a potential threat to royal security. The contrast between a child's natural empathy and the institutional machinery designed to protect him could not have been more stark, setting the stage for a confrontation between human values and rigid protocol that would ultimately force difficult decisions about what truly mattered in service to the crown. The following morning brought an official summons that Thomas had been dreading. Commander Blackwood's assistant delivered the formal request for Thomas to report to the security headquarters immediately after the morning guard rotation. The crisp white envelope bore the official seal that every member of the royal staff recognized as indicating serious business. Thomas arrived at the appointed time, his uniform pressed to perfection and his demeanor carefully controlled despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. 2 decades of exemplary service had taught him to face difficult situations with dignity, even when the outcome seemed predetermined. Commander Blackwood's office reflected his personality perfectly: sparse, organized, and intimidating. Military awards and commendations lined the walls alongside photographs of the commander with various members of the royal family during official events. Everything in the room spoke to duty, protocol, and unwavering adherence to regulations. "Sergeant Major Hartwell," Blackwood began without preamble, "yesterday's incident has raised serious concerns about your ability to maintain the professional standards required for this position." His tone was clinical, treating the conversation like any other administrative matter, rather than a discussion that would determine a man's career and livelihood. Thomas stood at attention, his eyes fixed on a point just above Blackwood's head, as he had been trained to do in formal military situations. He had prepared himself for this conversation, though hearing the actual words still felt like physical blows. "Sir, I understand that my personal circumstances may have affected my demeanor," Thomas replied carefully, "but at no time did I compromise the safety or security of any member of the royal family." The prince's gesture was entirely spontaneous and unrelated to any action on my part. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "That's precisely the problem, Sergeant Major. The fact that His Royal Highness felt compelled to comfort you indicates that your emotional state was visible enough to concern a child. This represents a fundamental breach of the professional distance required in your position." The commander opened a thick file that Thomas recognized as his personnel record, pages documenting years of commendations, successful missions, and unblemished service. Blackwood's fingers traced over the documents as if looking for some previous indication of the current problem. "Your service record is exemplary," Blackwood acknowledged, "which makes this situation all the more disappointing. You understand better than most that personal feelings cannot interfere with professional duties. The royal family depends on our ability to remain objective and focused solely on their protection." Thomas felt the weight of 20 years crashing down around him. Every sacrifice he had made, every moment of personal life he had surrendered for the sake of duty, seemed to count for nothing in the face of one moment of human vulnerability. "I've received reports that other staff members are discussing yesterday's incident," Blackwood continued. "This kind of attention and speculation creates exactly the sort of distraction that can compromise security operations. The protection of the royal family requires absolute discretion and professionalism at all times." The conversation took on an increasingly formal tone as Blackwood outlined his concerns about precedent and the message that would be sent if Thomas faced no consequences for what the commander viewed as a serious lapse in judgment. "Furthermore," Blackwood added, "Prince George's behavior yesterday suggests that he views security staff as personal friends rather than professional protectors. This blurring of boundaries could lead to dangerous situations, where His Royal Highness might approach guards for comfort or assistance, rather than following proper protocols during an actual emergency." Thomas found himself in the impossible position of defending a child's act of kindness while acknowledging the theoretical security implications that his commander had identified. The logical part of his mind understood Blackwood's reasoning, but the human part of him couldn't accept that compassion should be treated as a liability. The meeting continued with Blackwood outlining various disciplinary options, each carrying serious consequences for Thomas's career and future prospects. The commander made it clear that he viewed this incident as an opportunity to reinforce standards across the entire security detail, using Thomas as an example of what happened when personal feelings interfered with professional duties. As the discussion progressed, Thomas began to realize that his 20 years of faithful service might be ending, not because of any failure to protect the royal family, but because he had been human enough to accept comfort from a child who had noticed his pain. News of Thomas's disciplinary meeting reached Prince George through the castle's informal communication network. Young staff members who had witnessed the original interaction felt compelled to inform the prince that his act of kindness had inadvertently caused serious trouble for the guard he had tried to help. George received this information with a mixture of confusion and determination that surprised even the adults around him. The 10-year-old prince struggled to understand how showing concern for another person could be considered wrong, especially when his parents had consistently taught him that empathy and compassion were among the most important qualities he could develop. That afternoon, George made a decision that would shock everyone involved. Instead of discussing the matter with his parents or tutors, the young prince requested a formal meeting with Commander Blackwood. The request, delivered through proper channels with the polite insistence that only royalty could manage, left the security chief with little choice but to agree. The meeting took place in one of the castle's smaller conference rooms, chosen specifically to avoid the intimidating atmosphere of Blackwood's office. George arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his private secretary as protocol required, but carrying himself with a dignity that reminded everyone present that despite his youth, he was indeed a member of the royal family. Commander Blackwood found himself in the unprecedented position of facing criticism from a child who happened to outrank him in the royal hierarchy. George's opening words caught the security chief completely off guard. Commander Blackwood, the prince began, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation instilled by years of proper education. I understand that Sergeant Major Hartwell is in trouble because I tried to help him when he was sad. I want to know why kindness is considered a problem in our household. The directness of the question left Blackwood scrambling for an appropriate response. He had prepared for this meeting expecting to explain security protocols to a child, not to defend his actions against someone who clearly understood the moral implications of the situation better than he had anticipated. Your Royal Highness, Blackwood replied carefully. The security of your family requires very specific protocols. When staff members become emotionally involved with protected individuals, it can create vulnerabilities that might be exploited by people who wish to harm you. George listened intently, his young face serious as he processed the commander's explanation. After a moment of consideration, he responded with logic that cut straight to the heart of the matter. But Commander, Sergeant Major Hartwell wasn't emotionally involved with me. He was sad about something else entirely, and I simply noticed that he needed comfort. If noticing when people are in pain and trying to help them is wrong, then I don't understand what we're supposed to do when we see suffering. The prince's words carried the weight of moral authority that transcended his age, leaving Blackwood struggling to reconcile his rigid security protocols with the fundamental human values that the royal family was supposed to represent. George continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. My parents have taught me that our position gives us the responsibility to care for others, not to hide behind rules that prevent us from showing basic human decency. If Sergeant Major Hartwell loses his job because I was kind to him, then something is very wrong with our rules. The meeting took on an increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere as the young prince systematically dismantled the commander's arguments with simple moral reasoning. George's questions revealed the fundamental contradiction between treating people with dignity and maintaining the artificial barriers that security protocols demanded. Commander Blackwood found himself defending policies that suddenly seemed cold and inhumane when viewed through the eyes of a child who had been raised to value compassion above convenience. The prince's unwavering insistence that kindness should never be punished left the security chief questioning assumptions he had never examined before. As the conversation progressed, it became clear that George had no intention of accepting the disciplinary action against Thomas without a fight. The young prince's determination to protect someone who had served his family faithfully for 20 years demonstrated a strength of character that impressed even those who disagreed with his position. The meeting concluded with George making a request that left Commander Blackwood stunned. The prince formally asked to speak with his father about the entire situation, making it clear that he intended to use whatever influence his position provided to ensure that Thomas received fair treatment. The 10-year-old's willingness to challenge authority on behalf of someone he barely knew personally showed remarkable courage and moral conviction. Prince William received his son's request for a private meeting with the mixture of pride and concern that characterized much of his parenting experience. George's formal approach to addressing what he saw as an injustice impressed his father, even as it highlighted the complex challenges of raising children within the constraints of royal protocol. The father-son conversation took place in William's private study, away from the formal atmosphere of official royal business. George explained the entire situation with remarkable clarity, demonstrating his understanding of both the emotional and procedural aspects of the controversy surrounding Thomas Hartwell. William listened carefully as his son outlined the moral principles at stake, recognizing his own values reflected in George's passionate defense of compassion over rigid rule-following. The prince's argument that kindness should never be discouraged, regardless of protocol concerns, resonated deeply with William's own beliefs about the role of the modern monarchy. After hearing George's complete account, William made a decision that would surprise many within the royal household. He requested his own meeting with Commander Blackwood, but this time the security chief would face questions from the future King of England about policies that seemed to discourage the very qualities the royal family hoped to embody. The meeting between William and Blackwood took place the following morning, with the Prince of Wales making it clear that he expected a full explanation of how his son's act of kindness had become grounds for disciplinary action against a longtime and faithful employee. Commander Blackwood found himself in an increasingly untenable position as William systematically questioned the logic behind punishing empathy and human connection. The prince's pointed observations about the importance of maintaining public trust through genuine care for others left the security chief struggling to defend policies that suddenly seemed counterproductive to the monarchy's broader goals. William's intervention led to a comprehensive review of security protocols, with particular attention to the balance between professional standards and human dignity. The Prince of Wales made it clear that while security remained paramount, the royal family's commitment to treating all people with respect and compassion could not be compromised for the sake of administrative convenience. Thomas Hartwell received word of his vindication through official channels, though the emotional impact of the entire experience had already taken its toll. The veteran guard found himself deeply moved by Prince George's willingness to challenge authority on his behalf. But the stress of facing potential dismissal after 20 years of service had fundamentally changed his relationship with his role. In a decision that surprised everyone involved, Thomas submitted his resignation from royal service 3 weeks after the incident. His resignation letter cited personal reasons and expressed gratitude for his years of service. But those close to the situation understood that the disciplinary process had damaged something essential in his connection to the work he had once loved. Thomas's departure represented a loss that went beyond losing an experienced security professional. His resignation highlighted the human cost of rigid institutional thinking and the importance of balancing security concerns with the basic human values that gave meaning to royal service. Prince George learned of Thomas's resignation with profound sadness, understanding that despite his efforts to help, the guard he had tried to comfort would still pay a price for the controversy that had erupted around their brief interaction. The experience taught the young prince valuable lessons about the complexity of adult institutions and the sometimes unexpected consequences of even well-intentioned actions. Commander Blackwood remained in his position but found his authority significantly diminished by the entire affair. The incident became a catalyst for broader discussions about modernizing royal security protocols to better align with the family's values while maintaining necessary protection standards. The story of Prince George's simple act of kindness and its far-reaching consequences became legendary within royal circles, serving as a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest gestures of human compassion. Thomas Hartwell's sacrifice, though unintended, ultimately contributed to creating a more humane approach to royal service that better reflected the values the monarchy sought to represent.